I'm out here at my 300-yard line. I've got my shot marker set up, and I've got 20 rounds of ammo that we are going to shoot and to see how exactly being wet affects accuracy. We're going to shoot some control groups. We're going to lightly mist some ammo. We're going to heavily get some ammo wet, and we're going to see what does it do to pressure, what does it do to velocity, and ultimately, do we see a difference on target? As I said, this is a huge issue for competitors and for hunters alike. There's a lot of, I'd say, misinformation about this. I will just tell you from my experience shooting competitions, it is absolutely critical. I keep a towel if there's any chance of moisture. It doesn't matter if it's a foggy morning. It doesn't matter if it's raining. I wipe off that ammo. I want to keep a little rain cover over my gun. And I want to keep the action in the ammo as completely dry as possible because I have seen velocity spikes and changes on target, but I've never seen anybody actually do a full-blown test. So I've got my squirt bottle here. I'm going to go through, we're going to shoot some ammo, and we're going to see how it goes. Let me get set up. And we're all set to go. I've put 5 rounds through the gun. That's just to foul it out, get it set up and ready to go. I've got my 20 rounds here, and what we're gonna do is I'm gonna shoot 5 that are dry, and then we're gonna go ahead and shoot 5 that are wet, and then I'm going to pull a couple patches through the chamber, make sure that it dries out. We'll let it, the heat kind of get rid of any additional moisture that might be in there. And then we'll shoot another 5, and then I'm gonna get this 5 even wetter and, send them down. And we're gonna see what happens. So at this point, I've got my chrono set up. We're gonna put 5 rounds. I am shooting at 300 yards again. And let's get you so you can see what's happening on target. Now I've got it zoomed in because I know where I'm going to pretty much be hitting here. And downrange, I'm aiming at a circle it's about 3/4 of an inch in size, so it gives me a really nice aiming point. We have just a little bit of wind, but it's not much. There's a little bit of mirage showing. Luckily, it actually was a little bit windier when I first showed up, so I'm actually pretty happy about this. But let's get these first 5 down, and then we will go from there. So I'm not sure on these 2, they felt a little tighter. Not sure why, but you did see they printed just a little bit higher on target. And then the next 3 came in, like the total group is, what are we looking at here? 1.7. Those last 3 came in at 1/4 of an inch. So not sure if maybe I didn't foul out the gun enough or, I don't know, but that's why I always bring a couple rounds to test out so we can see what happens. But as far as, so we're gonna have dry 1, we have an average of 2873 on my velocity. We have an SD of 5.6 and an ES of 14.9, all numbers that are within my range of acceptability right now. So I'm happy with that. So now we're gonna have some fun. I'm gonna reset my chronograph here. And we're going to save this target as dry 1. And now, okay, so I have a nice mist going, and I don't wanna get this on anything else, so I'm gonna do my best here, and we're going to just lightly mist it. So it's only one side, And we've got it in there. And I'm just going to do this each time. Definitely a little heavier bolt lift. I mean, without a doubt, a little heavier bolt lift. So there's one, again, one missed. Oh, that's heavy. Oh. Oh. Now this simulates maybe a really heavy fog if you're out hunting, kind of a drizzle. They chamber great, but boy, that's getting heavy on the bolt lift. Jeez. It's going to be interesting when we get through all 5 of these. Okay, so there's another mist. Okay. And another mist. So that's just a light amount of water. And that was interesting because the first 3, you know, you're almost looking at it thinking, man, it's almost tighter when they're wet. But the fact is they do get kind of loose when you get them wet. And you can see number 4, like as I shot more consecutive rounds that were wet, it definitely opened up on shots 4 and 5. I wasn't doing anything different, but I don't know if you could tell, but that bolt lift was getting really hard. So from a competitive standpoint, that bolt lift is just not good. Like even if everything was shooting good, the amount of rocking that it puts into the gun, taking you out of position. Obviously I'm getting out of position because I have to spray them, but if you were shooting in a match, you would have to be coming out of position every time. That's taking time off your wind reads. If you're out hunting, imagine a subsequent shot on game. If you needed to do a quick follow-up and you had that heavy bolt lift, like that would be tough. And that was right off the bat with the first shot being wet. So I'm going to take a minute here. We're going to pull a patch through here or 2, and then we're going to put my barrel cooler on it. We're going to make sure that it gets as dry as it possibly can for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to run this test again. But if we look at the numbers here, our average went up from, so that's wet 2, or wet 1, and then our average went up to 2882, so not a lot, like 9 feet per second. That could be barrel heat too, it's not just the pressure. But our SD went up to 7.5 and our ES went up to 19.8. So definitely an increase all around. And then if I look at the total group size here, it's 1.5 inches. So still, I mean, still a half-minute group at 300 there. But you can see where they started getting kind of some errant shots. So I am curious, after we let this cool down and we run the test again, do we see some repeating of this test? And this is pretty interesting. This is, like I said, this is something I've wanted to do for a long time. So let me shut it down for a minute and we'll be back. So it's been, 5 or 10 minutes. It hasn't been horribly long, but I did pull a couple patches through. I took a mop with some patches on it and ran it through the chamber, through the action, had the barrel cooler on it, and then of course there is barrel heat as well, although honestly not a whole lot. And so at this point, as far as I can, I've gotten the action completely dry again. So I'm gonna put aside the squirt bottle for a minute, and we're gonna go ahead and shoot our 5 control rounds again. So this is gonna be just the standard dry, just a good old dry round, just something normal here. So there's the 5 control. And when I did go back and look at that first group for my control, I did notice that I probably did not foul the gun out enough. The 5 rounds was probably just a little bit shy because those first 2 rounds had about, well, I can't remember exactly what they were, but they were definitely both the same speed and different from the other 3 that were right there that were like a 1/4 inch. So this, I think, better accurately shows what the control group should be doing. And so we've got a little 5-shot group there. You notice there was really no bolt. There's no bolt lift issues. Everything shot well. I will say that my average speed is, again, just a little bit higher as the barrel's gotten a little warmer still. 2887, because even when you cool the barrel, there's still some residual heat in there, right? And then the SD is 6.9, so a little lower than the last wet round. And then 17.8 on the ES. So that's the dry, and then you can see our group here. I mean, it's a nice group. It's, you know, just over 1/3 of a minute. So 1.1, 1.13, shoot, I can't read it. Anyway, it's right in there. It looks really nice. So let's save this one as dry 2. And now we are going to get the next batch just a little bit wetter. So I'm gonna give these probably 3 squirts each, and we're gonna see what happens. So I'm just turning it as we do it here. So that's substantially wet. And let me reset my chrono here real quick. And the other thing to consider is there's always been a theory that if you let your rounds, you know, we'll call it cook, inside the chamber, if you have a hot gun for competition, that you're letting that water evaporate so it has less of an impact. You know, that would be a totally different test right now. I am trying to shoot these as fast as I can after they've been wet so that we have the maximum effect here. But let's go ahead and get these chambered up. Oh, and I can already feel that that's tighter. Whew. All right, 1, 2, 3. Oh wow, velocity on that one, 2906. One, two, three. Okay. The bolt lift, I have to say, is probably the biggest noticeable issue. I mean, these are dripping wet now, and that's my last one. So I don't love the bolt lift. Not really seeing, I mean, there is definitely some pressure marks. If I go back and look, there's definitely ejector marks, which is not great. Like there's a substantial extractor mark or ejector mark here. And if I look at the if I look at the dry ones, there's nothing. And then if I look at these other ones, oh yeah, there's definitely an ejector mark there. So definite signs of pressure. I would say primer-wise, I'm not really seeing, like there's no cratering or anything, but there's definite pressure with that ejectors.
I'm going to show you here probably the best example of why you want to keep your ammo dry, because I know after watching the shooting, you're probably thinking, well, if it gets wet, it still groups really well. You know, and in fairness on the testing, yeah, it actually wasn't too bad when it was all consistently sprayed exactly the same. It was creating very consistent pressures, it appears, velocities, all that kind of stuff. But let's just say you're shooting and your ammo is dry, and then suddenly some of it gets wet because you don't have a great way to keep it dry, or maybe the one in the chamber if you're hunting was dry, but then one that is, you know, maybe in a like an elastic band on the outside of the gun or somewhere else where it could get wet. Watch the difference in point of impact. So here's our dry, and these are all shot at the exact same point of aim. So here is your point of impact, and then when we go to wet, look at the shift. Dry, wet, right? That is probably a good half-minute variance. I'm at 300 yards, so that's probably a good 1.5 inch center-to-center variance on target. Now, so if I'm shooting a really nice group in a match, or I take a shot on an animal, and then I put a wet round in, boom, suddenly it is half minute off. Now, that may not seem like a lot, and maybe in the hunting world, which I'm not super familiar with, that may not bother you. That is still a pretty big variance. You know, I mean, at 600 yards, that's a 3-inch difference. And on competition, whether it's, you know, PRS on steel, targets, paper, whatever, that is a huge potential for a miss if it's steel, or a very big scoring change on paper. That could easily be an X or a 10 here, and then suddenly you are at a 9 simply because you got moisture. And if we go to the next set of targets, we get the exact same result. Here's our dry, and then boom, our wet shifts considerably on target with the exact same point of aim.
So at the end of the day, after shooting 20 rounds, which I know is a very small group, what are we left with? Well, I think we're left with, there is a difference. It causes a big pressure issue for sure. And potentially what you're gonna see is you're gonna see something where you're gonna get an errant round somewhere. And I think that's just gonna come with the more rounds you shoot. In a hunting situation, potentially you're not gonna see it if it's only a couple rounds. But in a competition setting, I 100% guarantee you that if you are shooting wet rounds or in a wet chamber, something is going to come out of it. So I hope that this test helps you. I appreciate everybody watching. You guys have a good one. We'll talk later. We'll see you later.